Your Excellencies, permit me to stand on many of you will probably remember, as Dare said, 2021 August, in the same hall, a big ceremony celebrating my 60th birthday and launching my book. It was organized and paid for by Herbert. And to think that I'm standing on this same stage Thanks, Alex. Thank you. And I was saying some time ago that for someone like me who gets into a lot of trouble, I need my friends. I get into trouble without knowing how I'm going to come out of it. But as I said on that day, I go into trouble with my eyes closed because I know that at the end, there will always be some people, a few people in my life who will always be there for me. When you lose just one of those people, it leaves a vacuum in your life. There are many stories I can tell about Herbert. Funny, my first friend in the family was not Herbert, it was his sister Peggy. She introduced me to the family. I used to go to the house in Anthony Village. And what I remember in those days was Peggy was more relaxed, talking and joking with me in front of her parents than in front of Herbert. She was afraid of Herbert. And I was also afraid of him. I was a middle management banker, and there were senior people in Access. Even though he was younger than me, there were senior people in GT, setting up Access Bank. Professionally, Ike and Herbert came to my attention in a very serious manner in 2005 as an executive director in First Bank. And I'm glad my friend Alex Ote is here. He was on the board of First Bank with me. And he'll remember that as ED Risk, I had the task of doing the competitor analysis of banks, and it was always First Bank against all the big banks. And one day I came to Exco and I had Access Bank. And at that time it was a joke. They all laughed. how can you compare First Bank to this bank? And I said, look at what these two young men are doing. Access Bank had the highest compound average growth rate. It had cost to revenue ratios that were comparable to Citibank and Standard Chartered and international banks. It had a very low level of non-performing loans, but as the soft issues, half of their branch managers were female. They were talking about the Equator Principles and sustainable banking, forming partnerships with FMO. And I said, this bank is doing everything we're trying to do. This is the bank that you need to watch out for. This was 20 years ago. And I watched, and true to form, Ike and Herbert built this bank to a point where, to the shock of everybody, Access Bank became bigger than First Bank and all the other banks in this country. So the beginning of my relationship with them was one of professional respect and admiration, which was mutual because at that time I was also building my reputation as a chief risk officer in the industry. Then I moved to the central bank. And I started something which was the Bankers Committee retreat, where this was in 2009, in the middle of the banking crisis, when everything, just like today, it looked like everything was going to, the sky was going to fall on the country. And we met in Enugu. And I said, look, guys, I know we feel the world is coming to an end, but the sun will rise tomorrow. What I want us to do is, in the middle of this crisis, lay the foundation for the banking system we want to see after the crisis. And the objective then was to link the banking sector assets to the real economy. And Ike and Herbert in Access Bank were chosen as the chairpersons of the subcommittee on economic development. Most of what I achieved in Central Bank would not have been possible without them. The idea of that retreat was to put the brains together in the central bank and the banking industry and think. And I remember the first year, my deputy governors, when the governor and the deputy governors were standing in front of bankers, before then, with the central bank, the governor and deputy governors were gods. The idea that bank MDs, that the governor would have to account to bank MDs, would have targets, and sit down in that meeting and answer questions was new. But we soon discovered, including the deputy governors who resisted, that by opening ourselves up to debate, by letting all these brilliant bank CEOs come into the conversation, we enriched the work of the central bank. And we achieved more in 5 years than we could have achieved in 20 years without these people. And Ike and Herbert were key to that. I listened to the tributes on Herbert on Monday. and I've listened to those that were given today. There are times when people die and out of decency, we simply just say nice things about them. But I think everyone who knew Herbert, sitting through all those hours, would agree with me that not one word, not one compliment paid to Herbert was untrue. He had many sides, and on that day, and it's one of those days when everybody remembers where he was. It was a Saturday. I had a big religious ceremony in Abuja. I had no idea what was happening. And I came to the airport, waiting for a plane, and I got a call from Bola Adeshola. I picked up the phone and we're chatting. After 2 sentences, she said, "Lamido, you haven't heard." And I said, "What?" "You haven't heard about Herbert." And I said, "What?" And she said this was what she was hearing. I immediately called Paul Usoro. And you see, Paul will understand how I feel. About 2 years ago, I put all my savings into a trust for the education of my children. I have many. And my priority as a father is to make sure that when I pass away, they will have a good education. Paul was the solicitor who put together that trust. Herbert was the lead protector. And Paul will remember when we had the first formal meeting, I said, "Herbert, I'm placing you in charge of this trust for the education of my children, because I know that even if I died and did not leave any money, you would educate my children." I was thinking I would die and leave Herbert. That's a few things. We have all heard about him, about his loyalty. When I had problems in Kano, I called him about 6 months before I was told to leave Kano. And I said to him, "Herbert, I know you're doing all your best to solve all this problem, but I'm convinced that this is what is going to happen." And he said to me, "Your Highness, don't worry. Whatever happens, Don't worry, we're here for you. On the day I heard on the radio that I was dethroned, the night before I knew it was going to happen, and I called him and said, I want to come to Lagos when it happens. The announcement was made at about 9 a.m. By noon, Herbert had a plane on the tarmac in Kano. The plan then was to take me into exile for many years. I put my family on that plane. No message, no phone call, nothing. Just put them on that plane and sent them to Lagos. Herbert received them, put them in a hotel. Later, got them flats, got them accommodation. For months, when I came, we stayed there. I can go on and on. Shola is here. Herbert said to me, Your Highness, you want to travel, tell Shola. I just called Shola and I get a jet. So much so that people believe I own the jet. Some people believe that I own Access Bank and Ike and Herbert are fronting for me. They gave me the cars and the drivers. They gave me security. They gave me the private jet. And they ask for nothing, and they don't talk about it. When I talk to when I meet my friends, our mutual friends, and I say, this is what Ike and Herbert have done, they're shocked because they never tell anyone. And then we talk about respect. Even, I have lived in Lagos for 4 years. The house my family lives in was provided by Herbert. I say this because on the day he died, I said on a chat group I was in, that in the coming weeks and months, people will get to know Herbert, the human being. People know him as a banker, as a businessman. They don't know the human being. I listened to governors yesterday talk about how he supported their political ambition. I also got him to support political ambitions of governors. The last time I saw Herbert and spoke in his house, he was outlining plans for how he would help the elected governor of Kano State and how he would help provide finance to build Kano. He was always about others, never about himself. As I said, he said to me, don't worry. And he has made my transition from one position to another as smooth as anything. And if you've been listening from Monday to Wednesday, you'll see the number of people. And you can't imagine how one human being could have been so many things to so many people. But I take comfort in one thing, and it's an interesting story I'm going to share of the very last moments of Herbert. On the night before this happened, I was on a chat group, Felicia Phillips' chat group, when somebody made a few remarks about Herbert that I found offensive. And I could not resist it. I went in and defended Herbert and made my point very clear that this was totally unacceptable. A few days after Herbert died, I was in Hong Kong. A friend called me, Bayodolami, and said, DJ Ali wants your phone number. Should I give him? And I said, yes, maybe he wants me to come and talk about the economy. And I'm not going to say anything because everything I had to say, I have said. Now we're where we are. I have nothing else to say. So, DJ Ali sends me a message. And I want to thank DJ Ali. And I want to thank God for what he did. I usually object to people forwarding messages from groups. And DJ Ali had sent a message to Herbert at about 3:20 a.m. that morning, telling him how I had stood up and defended him, and forwarding my entire message to him. Herbert replied at 3:28 a.m. with one word: unbelievable. DJ Ali sent another message at 3:50, which was not delivered. From the presentation of the air traffic controllers, the crash happened at 3:40. So possibly the last thing Herbert read was my message talking about him. And I'm grateful to God that he left knowing that he had a friend. My condolences to the family. And I apologize for this. I always thought I would not be able to do it, but we have to tell Herbert's story. And may his soul rest in peace.
Amen. Ovation for a man who never played around when it comes to anything that concerned Herbert. Likewise, Herbert never joked with the relationship that he has with the 14th Emir of Kano, His Highness Khalifa Mohammed Sanusi II. Another round of applause for him, please, ladies and gentlemen.